Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're so glad to welcome you as part of our community tonight. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and distributed live stream. By entering this virtual meeting room, you give your consent to be recorded and distributed by Vienna Live with Simeon Morrow and other third parties. If you prefer to not be recorded, please turn off your camera and microphone and/or go to the Facebook Live video feed, the link to which I'll now place in the chat room. For a better experience, please turn off your microphone and set your video to gallery view. This show thrives on participant contributions, and all participants are encouraged to actively participate in this webinar by asking questions and making comments. To do so, please either write in the chat room, raise your hand, or turn on your microphone to say hi, and I will be delighted to include your perspective in the conversation. Tonight, our featured guest is Maria Krasinski, illustrator of the forthcoming book, Art Hiding in Paris, and managing director of News Decoder, a news service that publishes news for and by a global youth readership. Also joining us tonight is Professor Dr. Lino Rivera, Professor of Music at St. Mary's College of California. Maria, welcome.
I'm still muted. Hello, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Maria, so tell us a little bit about yourself and your work.
Sure. So as you mentioned in the intro, I am the managing director of News Decoder, which is a Paris-based global news service for young people. And we teach journalistic skills and behaviors that help young people better understand complex issues, increase their media literacy, and really become more informed global citizens. And this ties a lot into my background in youth civic engagement, youth education, and an international exchange. So prior to News Decoder, I was in the Peace Corps in Tbilisi, Georgia, working with an NGO focused on youth civic engagement and supporting marginalized groups through advocacy. And so working with them on fundraising and organizational capacity building. Prior to that, I lived in Chicago for quite a long time, working on State Department sponsored public diplomacy and cultural exchange programs. So welcoming visitors from more than 100 different countries every year to Chicago. And they were there to explore their fields from law and education and architecture and arts. And my role is to sort of introduce them to their counterparts in Chicago and make that space for that exchange of ideas and experiences and hopefully future collaborations. And that ties in closely with the other side of my work. As you mentioned, I'm also an illustrator and artist. It's something I've just done my entire life. It's a part of who I am. I started out in arts education and I've been a teaching artist, and I really look to the arts as a space to open dialogue, connect across borders. And now in the last couple of years, that's turned into these book projects with my partner and collaborator and lifelong friend, Lori Zimmer. Art Hiding in Paris is coming out this fall, which is the follow-up to our first book, Art Hiding in New York, which came out in 2020.
Okay, so Maria, I understand that you studied psychology during your undergraduate studies. Tell us a little bit about that and how that then led into, this, like you said, you had your lifelong passion for illustration. I know that you took off a few years just recently to do the illustration of those books, Art Hiding in New York and now Art Hiding in Paris. Tell us a little bit about that, how you moved more into professional illustration.
Sure. So I think like a lot of students, I entered university just as a sponge. I was curious to learn about all the disciplines, and I came in as a math major, and then I took some anthropology courses, and then I was going to be an anthropologist, and then took history classes, and I was set on history and geography. And but kind of through the course over 4 years, I ended up in a lot of psychology, sociology sort of courses, because I was really interested in just kind of studying human development, human behaviors, and in tandem also taking quite a lot of art and art history classes. And so actually my intention, I thought I'd be an art therapist, and that's sort of where the psychology angle comes in. But as I mentioned, I also worked in arts education and kind of applying the psychology and how we think and feel and make sense of the world, bringing that into the arts realm. And that's why art therapy and arts education appealed to me so much. It was sort of then in my first job after college, I worked for a museum in our museum education department and worked with a lot of students and teachers on how they could kind of activate the museum collection and make it relevant to what they were learning and to their everyday lives. You know, it was an ancient archaeology museum, not exactly modern, not digital, but, you know, finding ways to connect that to students' lives and to see how that sparked their imagination and creativity and growth as learners, as people. That was really special to me. And so really my career has taken a lot of turns and moves, but there's always been that thread of education, not necessarily in a formal sense, but that sort of informal learning, that curiosity about the world, about other people, about how we're connected. And you know, that's how I ended up in the arts field, and then education, and then into international exchange, which is sort of a natural extension of that. And then but in kind of as a lot of us who have creative interests and pursuits, it's not always our main job, and it often takes a back seat to what we do on our day to day. And when I was in the Peace Corps in Tbilisi, you know, it was a bit slower pace of life. You know, a lot of times your work kind of, you keep it at work, and then you have some free time. And I used that opportunity to go back to my creative side and paint more and draw more. And it was kind of a bit of a happenstance, serendipity, that my friend came to visit me when I was there, and she had this idea for a book project. I started showing her some of the sketches and drawings I'd been doing in Tbilisi, and she's like, this is the exact style I want for this book I've been thinking of. And so we hashed this idea just right there, and you know, the Airbnb we were renting. And so it's not something I thought, you know, I didn't have that on my lifetime bingo checklist, but just kind of, again, following that curiosity, making space for things like this in your life, making space for creativity to flourish, you know, leads to some pretty great things.
Okay, let's take a look at, this is Maria during her residency when she was doing the illustration for this book.
Hi there. My name is Maria Krasinski. I'm an artist, an illustrator, an arts educator, and currently I am the artist in residence at the Roger Smith Hotel. Been here for about 3 weeks now, really just exploring the beauty and history of this gem of a hotel right here in Midtown Manhattan, getting to know the people, the history, the places that made this such a gem that it is. I work primarily as an illustrator in watercolors, gouache, but I've kind of taken this opportunity to spread out and try some new mediums, some acrylic paints, different pen and ink. I also do a lot of digital drawing. So in this video, we're gonna walk you through a little bit of my process, some of the inspiration I've had in my time here, and show you what we've come up with. Now, my work is really inspired by architecture, history, nature, just like a lot of like the beauty that surrounds us every day that you might overlook or pass by all the time. And I really wanted to dig into that here at the Roger Smith. It is such a wonderful historic hotel. First time I walked in here, I felt like I was walking into my grandmother's house. And I mean that in the best way possible. I think nowadays so many hotels have a very sleek, modern, cool look, which is great, but it's really nice to walk in and kind of feel hugged by a space and really like embraced. And the first thing that jumped out to me were all of the textures, from the patterns on the rugs to currently I'm in the lamp room and I'm surrounded by 11 vintage lamps of different sizes and textures and colors. The wallpaper, the patterns on the chairs, kind of these overstuffed armchairs, which again really gave that homey feel. And so for the first few days I was here, I was just sort of a sponge, taking it all in, playing with different mediums. I had been working digitally for so long, so it was fun to just to kind of like get messy and play around. So I'm going to show you a few things that I've been up to. So like I said, the lamps were really like, it's quite a literal and figurative inspiration, like the literal light bulb going off to kind of kickstart things here when you're in a new space. I really love this scene of birds. In fact, I was going to see if I could steal this lamp and see if they would notice. Probably would. More floral textures, kind of zooming in on some of these patterns to kind of make them a little more abstract. And this one kind of looks a little monstery to me. Back to the birds. I really love florals, and now that the seasons are changing, it's really, kind of missing that bloom, that burst of color.
Okay, so excuse me, that was not about art hiding in Paris, but it was about your art in general. So tell us a little bit about this residency, about your about the work. About your work.
Yeah, it's interesting that wasn't explicitly that section about the development of the book, but the idea is there, and the thread of taking time, slowing down your day to just literally stop and smell the roses, or see the art that is all around us. That our busy lives just kind of, we're so focused on catching that train or getting to work. And so I really like to kind of pause and look around and what are the little details that we might overlook. And, during the pandemic, certainly the early days of COVID, when we were all stuck in place and on lockdown, I think it was an opportunity for a lot of us to do that and just see all the things we've been missing, or maybe take for granted in your hometown because you see it every day. And so in that case, with the Roger Smith, they were, like most hotels and hospitality centers, closed for COVID. And, the proprietors, they really wanted to still somehow activate the space and do something creative. And so they had an artist residency program for a few months, and they had some musicians, painters. I came in as an illustrator, all just with no set parameters, just kind of embrace the space, see what is inspired by it. It's a historic hotel. It's not a chain. It's not IKEA designed. Every space is unique. And so it was fun just to poke around and look at the patterns, the history. It has kind of a luminous history of people who've stayed there. And so those were some of the sketches that came of that. But, that idea of finding patterns, finding overlooked bits is exactly what plays into the books, the art hiding books.
Okay, so let's take a look at it. Here is the front of Art Hiding in Paris. There we have the map of Paris. Tell us a little bit about this.
Sure. So you all are getting a sneak preview. Lori and I just sent off the final edits to our publisher. So this is the first look, really, at some of the pieces from the book. So that will be the title page, and then in the inner pages is where you have this map. And so this represents, the red dots all represent the different sites that are in the book. There are 100 art pieces and art historical sites hiding in plain sight, as we say, all around the city. And so the focus of these books is really on things that are not in a museum, not in a gallery, that are accessible to the whole world, that you can just take a walk around the city, go explore a neighborhood, and it's like you were in a museum. Which again, during COVID, when the Art Hiding in New York came out, at first it was like, oh man, it's a pandemic, we can't have a book launch party, bookstores are closed, museums are closed. But people were still getting the book, and then they were just going out to explore because all those things were closed. But actually, there's such a wealth of art and history and creativity on display on every corner if you just look for it. And of course, between New York and Paris, we could have written 5 volumes about either city. So it was a challenge to narrow it down. And as you see, some arrondissements, the districts in Paris, have a greater cluster than others. So we if you see this, the 6th arrondissement and sort of the 5th, 6th, and into the 7th, that's the Latin Quarter, Saint-Germain-des-Prés area. Up in the 18th, that's Montmartre, another very rich, storied area. You know, that's where the Impressionists were living, and Van Gogh's home, one in Paris, one of them is there. And you go, every other building has a plaque on it for an artist who lived there or worked there. But we tried to spread out into the different districts, but you'll see there's quite a cluster there. And some of them are quite known. So it's a mix of public art pieces that you might pass by every day, but maybe there's an interesting story that you didn't think of. We have some metro stations that are works of art in and of themselves, like the Arts and Métiers station kind of feels, very like Jules Verne, kind of submarine-esque. We have a number of artist homes, places where they lived and worked, their studios, artist haunts. So after work, where did they go party? They went to restaurants and cafes. Not in the Paris book, but in the New York book, we had a section of, we called it What Once Was, because especially a city like New York, where you have constant development and turnover, a lot of these pieces did not last or were meant to be ephemeral, but we still wanted to capture that feeling. So when you went to the space, now it might be a Chipotle, but at one time this was an iconic arts installation or a meeting spot. So again, kind of using your imagination, which is why we used illustration versus photographs for a lot of these pieces. One, because some of them don't exist anymore, but also it's about being in a space that's hosted artists, have hosted these art historical events, and just to kind of imagine yourself and immerse yourself in that feeling in that era.
Wow. Okay, so we have Professor Lino Rivera writes in the chat room, this is a stimulating concept. I would love to have that book and wish that more like this is published. Lino, you there?
Yes, I am here. And Maria, thank you so much. Because, for myself, whenever I travel to a city, I actually do this, have visiting those places that I have read in books, in parts of the novels, especially historical sites. And I would visit them. And, it's just fascinating for me when you said, oh, this particular place no longer exists because now it's a Chipotle or it's a McDonald's restaurant. And it's like, I look at it and like, my goodness, once there was the glory and this importance of this place. I would like to have that kind of a concept in a book, because I do this myself when I visit foreign cities. Thank you.
No, right. That is exactly it. Lori and I, my co-author, I should say, this concept really started with a blog she started about 10 years ago, because we kind of joke, she got fired from her job working at an art gallery, and as a way to kind of work through that, she just started walking through Manhattan and started noticing these different sites, or like, oh, that's an interesting building, I wonder what happened there, and that slowly built up and up and up, and like you said, you go on these walks, or you read about something, and then you go to the physical place, and maybe something's there, maybe not. But one of the things from the New York book is there was an installation in Lower Manhattan of a wheat field, so looking like the countryside, like a rural area, which of course there's no place to put that in Manhattan anymore, but just to imagine at one time, I think it was in the 70s, I should remember this more, that there was just a full field full of wheat with towering skyscrapers in the background, and that you could walk through a field of wheat in the middle of Lower Manhattan. And now it's condos and highways and things like this. But that is our dream. This is book number 2, but we would really love to do this in cities all around the world. London, Rome, Barcelona, Chicago, where I come from. Okay, let's keep looking at the book then. So tell us a little bit about this, Guillaume Apollinaire. Yeah, so this is a Picasso sculpture that is just off Saint-Germain-des-Prés in the 6th arrondissement. It's in a very tranquil park just behind the church. It's a very heavily trafficked area. A lot of tourists go there. You know, got the Cafe du Magot, you know, where Hemingway and all sort of the artists of that era would hang out. But we loved this piece and we put it in the book because it is just kind of a quiet, unassuming park. You see people reading, having lunch, chatting, and there's a Picasso just right there in the middle of the park. And you know, it was an homage to Apollinaire, who is a good friend of his. And the sculpture, that the bust is the head of Dora Maar, who was a model and a muse of Picasso, but an artist in her own right. And you know, it has that kind of classic stylized Picasso features. And now I think they have since roped it off, so you can't lean up against the sculpture, you know, as they're depicted there. But again, that's the fun of illustration, is we can draw things as we might want them to be. But so we loved that one as a subtle Picasso out in plain sight.
And do you know anything more about this Apollinaire? It looks like it says 1880 to 1918, so he'd be the same age as Picasso, more or less.
Yeah,
looks like he died during World War One.
Exactly. Admittedly, I don't have as much detail on his biography, but they were friends, and this was, you know, after his death, as a way to honor him as a place. And it's quite a lovely, tranquil park. So it is a great place, I think, for reflection and honoring someone. The next piece is it's actually a clock. It's a sculpture clock that was installed in the 70s, I think in 1979. Unfortunately, the clock does not work anymore, but it's called the Defender of Time. And it's in the Quartier Horloge, sort of like the clock quarter near the Centre Pompidou. And so this is kind of an area that was formerly, you know, the Beaubourg area where Les Halles was, the big central market in Paris. And a lot of that area was torn down in the 70s. And so you'll find quite a lot of modern buildings there, including the Pompidou Center, which, if you're familiar, has the tubes and the glass and all kinds of very modern things coming off of it. And we love this clock because it's just a sight to behold, really. And it's you know, this figure who's defending time again from land, which is this dragon figure, from the sea, which is this crab, and from the air, which is the bird. I wish the clock still worked. You know, I kind of like to imagine that the whole thing would kind of come alive and start moving, but you just have to use your imagination. But it's perched up out of eyesight, and so you just kind of walk by and don't really see it so much, and it's tucked around the corner from the busy area.
Okay.
So this building, once you see it, you can't unsee it, I think. So this is the Maison Fresheftier, that's what it was, you know, at the time it was built. This is on the Rue Mouffetard in the 5th arrondissement, which, if you're familiar with Paris, the Rue Mouffetard is this very charming, historic, kind of ancient street that, you know, for a few days per week kind of closes to traffic, and it just has markets and this square, I didn't draw them all, but usually it's full of tables and cafes, and you have musicians performing and just people milling about, and it's such a lively street. And so this building dates, like many of the buildings in the area, you know, from the 17th century. But Maison Fresheftier was a butcher. And in the 1900s, early 1900s, they commissioned an artist to paint the facade to kind of make it stand out from the rest of the buildings on the block. But they did it using kind of a 15th century technique called sgraffito, where you had layers of plaster of different colors. So you put one color down, and then you put another color on, and then kind of etch away at the surface, revealing the color below. And in this case, it's an incredibly intricate, detailed building. I did not try to recreate that entire scene, but the animals depicted are often the animals you could then purchase in the butcher shop below, but it's done in a very stylized, you know, kind of forest wonderland way. Now I think there's a cheese shop and a clothes shop on the first floor. And again, you just see people milling by. There's hundreds of people going by here at a given moment. But if you just look up, you know, there's something that stands out from the crowd.
And can you tell us what the clientele are like? Are they're all from the neighborhood around there?
It's such a mix. That's why I like this part of town a lot, because it attracts a lot of tourists for sure, but it's such a classically Parisian area that's I stayed recently along in an apartment along there, and you have people doing their daily shopping and going along their way. So it's a really nice mix of, I think, locals, tourists. You kind of get the rhythm of the street, and you find there's some really great bakeries, and everyone has their go-to cheese shop or things like this.
Okay.
So these two are kind of, as Lori and I say, kind of like our dream, like that you have a space, you know, an office space or apartment, and in the course of some kind of renovation, you uncover a completely literally hidden gem. And so on the left side is the new Oscar de la Renta boutique in Paris off of the Champs-Élysées. And it was a few years ago, and it actually got some fanfare, some coverage. When they're doing the renovations, I think it was some sort of warehouse before the fashion house moved in, they uncovered this oil painting behind plaster drywall from the 1600s, you know, depicting a scene from the Crusades. And there's different theories for why this was covered up. They thought perhaps it was during World War II to kind of protect it from being demolished in any way. But just in the course of renovating to build the shop, they uncovered this, you know, nearly 400-year-old masterpiece. And last year when we were working on the book, I somewhat sheepishly went into the store and was like, I don't want to try on a wedding dress, but can I go look at the art on the wall? And they were so lovely and really excited, I think, to share this gem, which is now sort of the centerpiece of the second floor at the boutique.
Maria, how did you find out about it?
We actually, you know, the New York Times did a story about it. It kind of made the rounds of a lot of art and art history news sites, and we were like, we have to go see that in person. So it had a moment of getting some press and attention, and so we had to include it. And then the next image is from a place called Au Belle Poule, which is actually a former brothel in the second arrondissement on Rue Blondel. And kind of similarly, so this Au Belle Poule, I believe, was opened in 1880. So over 100 years ago, Belle Epoque era. Over time, you know, the brothels were closed in Paris, buildings changed hands, everything kind of got plastered over, drywalled over. And I think this had been a warehouse, a computer sales center. And only in the last 10 years, less than 10 years ago, the current proprietor, Carolyn, she inherited the building from family in the space, and they were doing renovations and again, taking down all the wood panels and found these absolutely pristine mosaics from the original brothel, still intact, completely intact, depicting these scenes kind of from mythological era. So you have like satyrs and fauns, and then to kind of more of that time of the Belle Epoque era of can-can dancers and the ladies. And so she has now completely restored the space. It's absolutely beautiful. It's an event space, so you can have an event there, but she also does historic talks every month. So we had a chance to go there, see it in person. It's not open to the public, it's sort of by appointment or at one of these events, but definitely a worthwhile thing to do if you're looking for something in Paris.
And Maria,
totally
what we're
gorgeous.
looking at right now, it's part of how it's on a wall, or where is it? In the bathroom,
Yep.
or?
So this was sort of a work in progress. So this is in the main space, which is covered in mirrors, kind of reflecting the walls, and have this really intricate tiled designs, this floral blue design that goes throughout. And then above are these different scenes from different eras. And there are mirrors on the ceiling to kind of reflect it from all angles.
So as soon as you go in, pretty much you see this.
Oh yeah, you walk in and there's a mosaic on the floor. There's a really beautiful mosaic in the bathroom, which they also uncovered, which now became the logo for Au Belle Poule for the event space. And then, you know, it's just a kind of a squarish room, just completely enveloped in these beautiful mosaics.
Wow.
Just the last little preview here. So this is Place Vendôme, which is very famous. A lot of people will be familiar with it. And then the column, it's right in the center of the road. So as you're coming in, you kind of go around either side. And It's kind of a luxury center of Paris. You know, the Ritz is off to the side there. You've got some of the big fashion houses that are there. But like anything, you know, there's lots of stories that you don't see immediately. And so we try to capture some of those stories in this section and in the illustration. So the figure in the front is wearing an Elsa Schiaparelli dress, the lobster dress, which was sort of iconic. And this is where Elsa Schiaparelli's fashion house was. And so that's kind of like where this surrealist art fashion melding kind of came from. And then at the top of the column, which was first erected for Napoleon, there are sort of like these Keith Haring-esque figures, because it's sort of as the story goes, after Keith Haring passed away, Yoko Ono had some of his ashes, which she brought to Paris and sprinkled some of them around the Place Vendôme, because that was a place that had meaning, or it felt right to do. And so I kind of like to think of Keith Haring sort of dancing around this very traditional historic monument. But there's, as I said, the Ritz is in this plaza as well. And there's the bar Hemingway there. So Ernest Hemingway spent a lot of time there. So all these historic figures who've come through Paris and made Paris art scene what it was, had an imprint on this area.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that tour.
Sure. October 18th, the rest of it comes out.
Wonderful. Well, and we'll take a look at that toward the end of the show. So next, let's take a look here of the work you do at News Decoder.
Mm-hmm.
In our interconnected world, we face challenges and opportunities that are increasingly global in scale. We are flooded with information about different issues, countries, and populations. News Decoder helps young people connect the dots to understand complex issues and become informed, solutions-based global citizens. We launched our nonprofit in 2015. Since then, more than 15,000 students from 20 countries on 5 continents have used our online platform to build global citizenship skills. Now, we're launching new resources open to youth all around the world.
I can only say that it's been life-changing for some of my students who cut their teeth on reporting at News Decoder and had an opportunity to speak to a more global audience than they maybe sometimes have at home on campus.
Our professional journalists have mentored hundreds of students to help them produce top-quality articles, podcasts, and webinars for a global audience.
My name is Domina Amara and I'm from Tanzania.
My name is Sadie and I'm from Manhattan.
I'm from Nigeria.
In San Diego, California.
Brussels, Belgium.
I'm from Colombia.
I'm from Denmark.
I'm from Colombia.
South Korea.
I'm from Jordan.
We've published more than 1,200 stories by and for young people. Educators use our innovative teaching tools to nurture global citizenship and connect classrooms across borders to examine global issues.
I'm so grateful for News Decoder for giving me the opportunities to simulate a newsroom type experience while I'm still in high school. I think the process of receiving feedback and applying it to my piece has been really helpful, especially as I'm working on my school's newspaper as editor-in-chief.
Fantastic. So Maria, tell us a little bit about News Decoder. Tell us what exactly it is and how you got involved.
Sure. So as the video kind of laid out, News Decoder is a global news service. We're based here in Paris, that's by and for young people. And so we publish articles by experienced correspondents who've worked for all the kind of top agencies, news agencies. They've covered all the world global events, but we're also publishing them side by side with students, mostly high school students, some university students. And the goal of our program is really to build young people's global citizenship skills. And by that, as the video kind of outlined, we are trying to build empathy, respect for diversity, curiosity about the world, cross-cultural communication, collaboration, and through journalism, through learning journalistic skills and collaborating with students across borders, we believe students are building their media literacy, better in engaging with the world, becoming more informed about the world and making smart decisions, and producing stories. So the end product are the articles or podcasts or multimedia videos, but it's really about the process and the skills and the experiences that they build along the way that carry on in no matter what field they go in. And so the main, sorry, I was going to say that the main focus of our work is our schools program, where we're working with 22 schools in 17 different countries, across 5 continents. And so students have a chance from all these schools to engage not just with our correspondents and get that kind of one-on-one mentoring on developing a piece, but also get to collaborate with each other or join in a webinar together and kind of discuss the same issue from different points in the world.
So Maria, you said that it's very important what you publish and that the students are publishing news articles and podcasts. Is that the meter of your success? If so, how successful have you been?
I would say that the publishing is not the end goal. It's really about the process. We have published over, I think, 1,300 stories by now, but it's really about building those longer term skills. And a lot of our students, they don't go on to study journalism necessarily. Some of them do, some are very keen to that, but it's the experience they have along the way of learning, breaking outside of their bubble, really. And we've had students who are in a school in kind of rural California, and they don't get a lot of exposure to the outside world, but through our webinars, they are collaborating with a school in Belgium. And in this particular example, I'm thinking of, they were developing a presentation around climate change. And so here was a chance for them to get involved with their communities on each side. They went out and interviewed organizations, farmers who are impacted by climate change. They went to a local exhibit in the municipality, and so really became more connected almost to their local context, and then being able to compare it with, in this case, from the Belgian and EU perspective, like, okay, what are governments doing? What is the EU doing around climate change? And really broaden their scope of understanding of, and again, in this case, a climate change issue, but that really applies to any kind of global issue. And that's really our goal, is to build that, not just curiosity, but then also bringing in the journalistic skills. They're looking at sources. How do you identify a reliable, trusted source? How do you get multiple perspectives on an issue? I think, like a lot of us, they're passionate about a certain issue, and maybe have strong opinions one way or the other, but it's always important to hear the counter views and to bring those in and to at least have that perspective represented, and just really kind of removing themselves a bit from the story and presenting the facts that they unearthed in their reporting. And so it's all of that process, which is really where I think the success lies for us. And if it ends up in a published piece, that's fantastic. It's great for young people to have something that's been vetted, they've worked with professional editors, they've worked with experienced journalists who've covered these topics for decades. It's a really unique opportunity for them to be published, but then also getting these lifelong skills along the way.
Okay, that brings us to our first roundtable. What exactly is journalism, and who exactly are journalists?
That's a big question for sure. I think journalism is often referred to, and I say this with the fact that I am actually not a trained professional journalist myself. I work with them. Been supporting youth journalists in journalism education for a long time. But journalism, I think it's really about providing citizenry with information. How you present information to the general populace to make the best possible decisions, whether that is about what's happening in your community, your government, your society. And through the journalistic processes, what we're teaching with our young people, these are kind of well-written stories that have been vetted, that have presented multiple viewpoints, that are independent media. And I think this is why journalism is referred to as the fourth estate, or the kind of the fourth pillar of democracy after, the legislative, executive, judicial. Then you have this independent entity that's shining a light on what's happening from an independent perspective. So I think that's from our perspective, my perspective, journalism is really there to inform citizens and give them the information and tools that they need.
Okay, the roundtable 2. Why is education what is the role of a journalist in Western society? In the United States, at least, since the post-Cold War era, prominent news organizations have been accused of quote unquote liberal bias. And in the past years, accusations of fake news have attempted to discredit any professional journalism whatsoever. Yet, since the Russian armed forces invasion of Ukraine, Western journalism seems to offer the only real story available. What role does journalism play in the Western way of life?
I think that goes back to, again, information in education. And, I think it's not any surprise that the more democratic a society is, the more open and free press that they have. And that's something that we tackle all the time. Even thinking about the 22 schools that we work in these different countries, they all kind of have a different reality, like how journalism operates in the US or in Denmark is going to look different than, say, Rwanda or Romania. If you kind of look, there are these scales of press freedom, media literacy, and that's what we're hoping to encourage more through education, through journalism education. How can a young person recognize that this is a trusted source, recognize that this has been verified in some way, and so I think it really does go back to by protecting journalism and supporting independent, trusted, balanced, authoritative journalism, you're also supporting democracy and strengthening democracy and protecting democracy around the world.
Okay. Penultimate question is, why is education in journalism an important part for youth all over the world? Should all citizens become journalists as a complement to the work of professional journalists?
What's interesting, I think we're kind of there in a way. We all have these devices in our pockets. We have Twitter feeds and putting out information constantly. And I think they really kind of go hand in hand in creating a more informed citizenry. And I think that, again, whether young people become actual journalists through the act of producing stories. News Decoder, we have a process we call PRDR, which is pitch, report, draft, revise, which kind of gets to the essentials of how you create a journalistic piece. First creating the pitch of your story. What's your question you're going to pursue? Who are you going to talk to? Thinking about your audience. And we're very focused on solutions. So not just looking backward at an issue, but you're going to go out and report, you're going to talk to people, but how are you going to move this story forward? How are you going to bring something new to the table? And that's something that I think can apply again to how young people approach any issue in life. It's like, okay, we're all sponges, we're all being inundated with information. How do you find the thread? How do you find a way to make progress on an issue? What can you contribute to that? And whether that's on their own social media feeds or in class, bringing these kind of citizen journalism perspectives, which maybe then they go on to become full reporters and working for media outlets. Who knows?
Okay, last question. So what does the future look like to you?
Oh gosh, for all that's going on in the world, I think the future looks pretty bright. That's the beauty of working with young people, is you just see the creativity, the resilience, the passion, and I feel good about where we're headed. Okay, let's see how we can get the book. Here it is. It's runningpress.com, Art Hiding in Paris. So $11.99 USD. That's for the ebook. I think the actual book is like $24.
24. Okay, there it is. $24
yeah, there you go.
For the hard book.
Just
okay,
to be
got
clear.
it. Excellent. So I will put that in the chat room right now. Everybody, there it is. And let's take a look how we can stay in touch with Maria Krasinski at News Decoder. So here's our website, newsdecoder.com. And Let's go back there. There it is, newsdecoder.com. So we can find out anything we want about News Decoder right here, Maria?
Yeah, you can read our stories. We have different categories. As I said, we publish students and journalists side by side. So sometimes you don't know who may have written an article, but we do have a section just for youth voices if you want to see the issues and the stories that our students care about, what's top of mind. You can also watch some of the videos they produce or listen to podcasts. There's quite a lot of content on there.
Fantastic. I'll put that in right now. There it is. So thank you so very much to Maria Krasinski.
Oh, thank you. This was great. Thanks so much for having me.
So let's take a look at next week. We have Agatha Eva Kordeka, micro publishing and the fine arts. Moving to foreign lands was a tradition in Agatha's family. Even before the Yalta Conference, Stalin was redrawing national borders to project his geopolitical power westward. By then, Agatha's grandparents from Soviet Ukraine and Belarus had already been forced to leave their homes and move to Krakow, Poland. Shortly thereafter, they moved even further west to the former Prussian city Breslau, today called Wrocław, Poland, where they actively participated in the former German city's Soviet renewal. Agatha, albeit for different reasons, moved from Poland to northern Italy, where, as she ironically laments, quote, "Nobody understands my jokes," end quote. Likewise, nobody understands her art. Agatha, a professional visual artist, has no local art center to exhibit at and no local artistic community to take part in. Her innovative solution to that artistic solitude was to dispatch her art around the globe by founding her own publishing company. Come welcome Agatha to our show. Once again, that is next Wednesday. Agatha Eva Kordeka, micro publishing and the fine arts. Once again, thank you so much to Maria Krasinski, to Lino Rivera. Thank you very much to Agnieszka Rivolet for her support of this show, and to you, our participants from Paris, France, New London, New Hampshire, in the Bay Area, California. Goodbye. See you next Wednesday.